when we
Sure.
get a real successor of St. Peter, I will let you know.
Ooh,
I
burn.
was going to ask that
Dennis,
question really
calm
quick.
down.
No, really quick.
No, you
So
said
the
really
Pope right
quick.
now, right now is a successor of St. Peter. That's what it's supposed to be, right? Because he's in Rome.
Supposed to.
He's supposed to be.
Supposed to be.
But you don't think he is?
No, I don't think the last one resigned according to the Constitution. So, I don't think this guy. I don't think he's a Christian, let alone.
Dang, really?
Couldn't you get excommunicated for saying that?
They just excommunicated somebody. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Archbishop Vigano.
Yeah.
Why? Because he denounced said
some stuff about the Pope.
It's an interesting. Actually, I should show you guys. Do I have it with me?
We're gonna have to do a round two.
Because I wrote a book about this, about Benedict's resignation and why this guy that we have now is not the Pope.
Okay.
But in a nutshell,
real quick.
Yeah.
Before you get into this, if you want, because I'm gonna make some cuts and some edits.
Sure.
Remember earlier I said, have you written any books or anything like that?
Oh, yeah.
If you want, just do a take right now where you're like,
oh, sure.
And also I have, and then I'll cut that in and put it on the front end.
In me and my what's the word? In my Catholic-centered world, I didn't even think that Protestants would be interested in my book on the Pope.
Oh, for sure. Sure we would.
Let me see if I got it handy.
And you have to keep in mind, we have a pretty broad audience when it comes to perspectives. We have a lot of people that aren't even like Christian that watch some of our stuff, because we talk about aliens and we talk about conspiracies and stuff. So this is right up that alley.
Yeah.
And I can see this being a great segue for people into this kind of material,
Cool beans. So my other book is The Third Secret of Fatima and the Synodal Church, Volume 1, Pope Benedict's Resignation. So let me explain it this way. On February 11th, 2013, Pope Benedict announces that he's going to resign. That night, 2 humongous lightning bolts strike St. Peter's Basilica, the dome.
Up.
Really?
You look it up on YouTube. When you watch the video, it's actually very exciting.
They have video on this.
Yeah. So, and then he that's when he announced his resignation, and they said it would be effective February 28th. So March 1st comes, and the chair is empty. The Latin expression is sede vacante, and so they hold what happens in the Catholic Church is when a pope resigns or when a pope dies, the cardinals get together, they elect somebody else, and they elected Jorge Mario Bergoglio from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and he became the new pope. But where was I going with this? So in Catholic circles, I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but we believe that at certain points in history, God kind of gives private revelation. It's not the same thing as the Bible, but it's like God talking to a person, telling them something's going on in the world and Christians need to address it. So Catholics believe that in 1917, during World War I, Christ's mother appeared to 3 little children in Portugal and warned them that in the 20th century, Russia was going to spread its errors throughout the world, and that the devil was going to try to infiltrate the church. And I think that's what's happened. So that's why it's called the Third Secret of Fatima and the Synodal Church, because under this guy Bergoglio, Francis, he's trying to basically tear down everything that's been handed down to us, most of which you and I would agree with, on Christian morality and a whole host of things that, and yet people still acknowledge him as the Pope, because there really isn't a constitutional process to get rid of somebody. But it's kind of like nobody can judge the Pope except God. But that's begging the question, right? Because you're assuming that he is the Pope.
Right.
Long story short, down through the centuries, there have been periods in church history where there were anti-popes versus popes, and people couldn't figure out who was the Pope, who was the anti-pope.
Wow.
This was around the time of you probably heard of Jan Hus, right?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, and some of the, in the, what was that, the 1300s? Yeah, 1300s, 1400s. Anyway, long story short, I don't trust anything that Pope Francis tells you.
Wow.
He's a Russian plant. He's like Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like Trump.
Yeah, sure. Okay, what's that?
We just figured it out.
Okay, Anderson Cooper. Okay.
Sorry, that was in there. I had to get it out.
Then I have a question. How can, if the Pope is there and he's been established and there's no way to get him out, how can a Catholic like yourself hold these views about the Pope if he's gone through the procedure? You're saying he just hasn't gone through the procedure?
Well,
the
it's
proper
like
procedure?
this. The weird thing is when Benedict, maybe you guys can back me up on this because I'm trying to persuade my fellow Catholics. And if you guys can agree with me on this, then maybe I'll win them over. I'm trying to persuade people in my book and in my podcasts that Benedict sort of wanted to have his cake and eat it too. Like he wanted to resign, but instead of just resigning, because there have been some popes, maybe 2 or 3, that have resigned in the last 2,000 years. But he said, I'm not going back to being Joseph Ratzinger. I want you to call me Pope Emeritus. And I'm going to continue to wear white. I'm going to continue to be called Your Holiness. And I'm going to continue to give special blessings that only the Pope can give. So it's kind of like he wanted to give up the administrative duties.
Right.
But in the eyes of God, he still wanted to be considered
Wanted
Pope.
the power.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a long story, but that's so my thesis is that's why we got this guy, and he's so terrible. He's terrible for 3 reasons. 1, because probably Benedict didn't resign properly. 2, the guy's a heretic. He teaches things that are contrary to the gospel. And 3, the reason why this archbishop recently got excommunicated is because he said that when this guy became pope, he didn't have the right, and his intention was not to become pope. His intention was to destroy the church.
Wow.
And in fact, to destroy Christianity writ large, actually, because he's cooperating with the United Nations and with Soros.
Oh my God.
I probably don't have to tell you guys about all that stuff, right?
I want to do a whole episode just on this.
That. Who ordains the next pope or the next successor? Who does that?
So it's interesting. In Catholic theology, whoever becomes the successor of Peter, it's a twofold process. So 1, the cardinals get together and they choose somebody. And technically the only requirements is that it be a man and that he be a baptized Christian. And that's enough.
I'm surprised Catholicism hasn't been canceled. Because nowadays, I'm surprised.
Are there
seriously
any
like why are
women
there nowadays, especially right? How is there not like a push for female popes?
You guys remember the WikiLeaks?
Yeah.
One of the WikiLeaks from John Podesta and Hillary Clinton. I got to be careful what I say. I'm going to end up 6 feet under the ground here. But one of the WikiLeaks, John Podesta says there has to be a Catholic spring, like the Egyptian spring or whatever it was a few years ago. There were those revolutions in the Middle East. There has to be a Catholic springtime where they throw off all these outdated ideas. Well, that was before Jorge Mario Bergoglio was put on the throne, and there's evidence. That'll be for our next, whenever we want to do that show about the papacy, I'll and the New World Order. I'll do it with you. But that's part of that. So, in answer to your original point, the point is that that's exactly what Bergoglio is doing. Pope Francis, he wants to create deaconettes or deaconesses.
Wow.
Now, this is different than the deaconesses from the New Testament. Because from the Catholic perspective, those women were not ordained; they were assistants. At the most general level of the word deacon, it kind of means an assistant. But anyway,
right.
So that what you're saying is actually happening. The bishop, the bad bishops, and the bad whoever he is want to take away all these traditional ideas. That like certain roles are for men, certain roles are for women.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah.
They want to modernize it. Okay. Dennis, you were asking who appoints?
Because now if this Russian plant ordains, is he going to ordain someone else? And then in his place, or
it's scary to think that you could have someone ungodly, maybe even possessed, with the keys to the house, So the way it works is that the cardinals get together and they choose a guy. Usually it's a cardinal like them, but it's up to him to accept. So the first stage is simply to select someone who could be pope. He has to select it, and if he selects it, it's God Almighty who makes him pope. It's not the. It's
How's
not
that validated or verified, or he just comes out one day and he's like, "Hey guys, God told me."
Well, no. The cardinals approach. So what they do is they have ballots. They have secret ballots because all throughout history there have been different factions. We want our guy to be the head of the.
Of course.
Yeah. Again, what does Clement, writing at the time of the apostles, claim? He says that Jesus himself warned us that the office of bishop would give rise to intrigues. And so that's been the case for the last 2,000 years, but especially for the Bishop of Rome or the Pope. So what they do is they hold the election, and it's secret, like it's called conclave, meaning that without keys. They're locked in the Apostolic Palace. Actually, they're locked in the where the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo did the ceiling, right? And they stay in there and they take votes and votes and votes, and they don't come out until they've selected a pope. So once the guy gets enough votes, and then the method for how many votes you need has changed over the years, but once the guy gets enough votes, then they come to him and they say, "Will you accept?" And if he accepts, then they take him out on the balcony and they present him as pope, whatever name he decides to take as pope, right? But it's God who makes him a successor of Peter. It's not a power that they give him. So it's not like ordaining someone, because when a bishop ordains you, he's giving you a power that was conferred on him. And that's why we have this apostolic succession.
But then how can it go wrong if God's the one that does it?
Well, the idea is that God.
Sorry that these questions are so basic, but I think they're pretty I think people are also thinking them, as we're painting this picture. Yeah.
So, it's how should we put this? Under ordinary circumstances, let's take an example from secular things, right? So, we elect a president. Maybe that wasn't such the best example.
Yeah.
We have an election.
I'm gonna cut that portion out. Let you redo it.
Exactly, right? So, you never know what's going to happen to you these days. But anyway, if the way it usually works in American history is you have an election, that person is the legitimate president,
right?
And even God accepts him, in a certain sense, as the president of the United States. But what I argue has happened, how this bad guy got in there, is they didn't follow the procedure properly. And if it's kind of like if men don't do their part, well then God doesn't do his part. Or I'll explain it even more clearly. So when you get married to somebody, in Catholic theology, if you enter a marriage, but you don't want to do what God says marriage is, like you've got your own agenda for what marriage is, God does not actually join the two of you together. I mean, you could have the ceremony, you could have children, you could have, a mortgage, but you're not actually married in the eyes of God. It's the same thing with the papacy. If you go into the idea, well, I'm going to come in, I'm going to wreck the church and I'm going to create a church of man. God doesn't make you the pope. I mean, you know what I'm trying to say? Like there's internal curbs to protect that from happening, at least spiritually. Now, practically speaking, you could have a guy running around claiming to be the Pope, the same way some people run around claiming that they're married, but in the eyes of God, they're not really married. That would be my analogy.
Are you popeless now?
That's what I would say.
Good.
That we've been popeless since. Actually, Dennis, could I use that for a book, a future book title?
Yeah.
Because
I thought that was a pun. I thought you were saying, "Are you hopeless?" I'm not even kidding.
Hopeless and pope. No,
yeah.
The word is sede vacante. That the chair is empty, and I would argue that the chair has been empty since Benedict XVI died on New Year's Eve, 2022. Yeah, 2022. But I'm in the minority. But that's the situation. It's unprecedented in church history to have somebody in that position, who is so antithetical to everything that you and I agree on.
Well, that's
that falls in line with the eschatology, right? Like what's happening now. I was just
gonna say, there's even in like the Protestant stream, there's a lot of people that think that the Catholic or the Pope at a certain point will play a role in what the end time, or what we're all expecting the end times to look like.
Yeah, I'll give you a quote.
That's pretty interesting.
Back when the King James Bible was being made, obviously during the Reformation, a lot of the Catholics had to flee England under Henry and then Elizabeth. They went to France. And so the Catholic English Bible is not as famous as the Protestant English Bible. But the Catholic English Bible was made in France by exiles. And it's called the Douay Rheims version because of those two cities where the scholars did their scholarship. Anyway, what my point is that when those scholars were writing the preface to their Bible, they said, we know that a lot of the Protestants, it was the height of the Reformation at that time. I know a lot of the Protestants are saying that the Pope is the Antichrist and this, that, and the other thing. Well, if a future Pope ever does such and such and such and such and such and such, go ahead and call him Antichrist.
Wow.
And I would say that's what's happening right now. Although the technical thing is that I don't actually consider him to be a pope. He's not a legitimate one.
Wow, man, this is going to be a great. Well, they're both going to be great episodes, but I'm super excited about the next one. We're not even done with this one. I keep trying to get back to 128.
Yeah, let's get back
182.
to 180.
But we're already like diving into the next one.
I know.
I love it.